out there, rock and rollers. Welcome to the 137th edition of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock podcast, brought to you by me, your host, Mac B. the Wolf, and I will be joined, as always, by my partner in crime from the East Coast of the U.S., Gary Action Jackson. And we appreciate you tuning in for our Lynyrd Skynyrd show last week. Very American band, celebrating their 50th anniversary of their debut album right around the 4th of July, which I hope everybody had a good and safe time during. But this week we're not doing an American band, and we're not doing an UK band, which is usually our motif here on the Ugly American Werewolf in London. We're actually going down under. As soon as I say that, I know you've got an idea of who it is. That's right, we're doing a show on AC/DC, but we're not going to review an album this time. We're actually fortunate enough to have rock author Martin Popoff of Canada coming on our show. Now, Martin has joined us before, as he is a fellow member of the Pantheon podcast family of music podcasts. And he's written, 115, 120 books. I don't know how many books he's written. He's written a ton of them. We had him on last year to talk about Blue Oyster Cult with us for a little while. But now he's got this big, beautiful AC/DC 50 book, which is a coffee table book. It's big and it's very colorful. It's got all sorts of images from the band over time, whether it's them playing live in the studio, shots of the rare album covers, backstage passes, whatever it might be. And it's broken down into 50 stories that really kind of encapsulate turning points, inflection points, or just important times in the history of the band. It's a really, really cool book, and we're so happy to have Martin on to talk about it. We're going to jump in with him here very shortly. Quickly, though, we want to take care of just a little bit of business. As I mentioned, we are proud members of the Pantheon podcast family of about 100 different music shows. Not all rock music. There's something in there for everybody. And you can learn more at pantheonpodcast.com or follow them at pantheonpods. And of course, we need to give a shout out to our sponsor, rarevinyl.com. Based in the UK, rarevinyl.com has been doing this for 40 years, folks, and they have over 250,000 items in stock. I've met their team, those who procure the records, those who sort through them, those who catalog them, those who ship them off. They're amazing folks, and they do a great job of not only getting you high-quality, pristine records, and it's not only records. You can get CDs or DVDs or singles or tour programs. Lots of amazing items there. So you can go to rarevinyl.com to find that, and you can use code UGLY, UGLY, to save 10% off your orders. And they ship all over the world. So I don't care if you're in Japan or Jamaica. Go to rarevinyl.com, use the code UGLY, you're going to save 10% off your order. You buy enough, it might just knock the shipping right off, which is always a big help. So you want to celebrate something, you want to get something special for somebody, or you're just looking for something that's hard to find. They have things from all over the world. Go to rarevinyl.com, use code UGLY, save yourself 10%. Now back to Martin Popoff and his AC/DC book. I never really met anybody who didn't like AC/DC. AC/DC is kind of the foundation of bedrock of hard rock, and you may go different ways down the heavy metal hard rock tree, but at some point you're going to get to the AC/DC branch, and most people are pretty comfortable there. And when I was in high school, Razor's Edge, Thunderstruck, Money Talks came out. It was huge. It was a big resurgence for AC/DC, and that album really helped keep them on top, got them to kind of walk over the whole grunge debacle that a lot of people got thrown out of or tried to catch up to, and they just kind of kept doing their own thing, which I think we're all pretty happy about. Just one sound, straight ahead, no ballads, four on the floor, crunch, 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 sophomoric lyrics, and it's all brilliant. Everybody likes AC/DC. You may not like every single song, or every single album, but you know that there's some AC/DC songs that you do love. And we talked to Martin about that. So let's stop with me talking. Let's get to Martin Popoff talking about his great book, AC/DC at 50, right here on The Wolf. So do you feel that you're rock's preeminent rock writer? I mean, we just had Mick Wall on the show not long ago, and I remember reading his stuff growing up and seeing him on Behind the Music. So I'm like, man, Mick's a big time rock writer. I'm like, yeah, but he doesn't have the volumes that Martin does. I mean, you've written more books than Jackson and I have collectively read.
Well, you know, he's better than me, and he's basically more, I'd say, more famous and more tapped into bands than me. So we'll put him ahead, and probably a couple others that I'm forgetting right now. But
first of all, the book, the AC/DC at 50 book, is killer, man. It's great. And it's a coffee table book, right? So it's not just, I'm going to take you detail by detail through everything that happened on every day as they got started or, all this kind of stuff. but that doesn't mean it isn't detailed, right? I mean, basically the concept is you went through 50 big points in their careers from the very beginning all the way through to the end, and then told stories around it. But I mean, what makes it such an amazing book and a coffee table book is all the pictures, right, of the band, of all the different album covers, single covers, backstage passes, whatever it may be. Plus, thanks to whichever lead singer it may have been, plus Angus, they are visually interesting, aren't they? There's something to behold, right? So let's. I mean, I know you're the writer and you got to do all that kind of research, but was like it just as difficult to get all the right pictures and stuff to go with all the stories that you were writing?
No, the beautiful part of dealing with this publisher and my editor over there, Dennis Pernew, I mean, they're just such a great company to deal with because all of that they do, right? And Dennis knows his music too. So he's out there thoughtfully picking what goes with what. And, I just get to leave all that to them. I turn in a few things from my collection or some photographs that I have or buddies, whatever. But I mean, generally, they do all that and the layouts are just gorgeous, right? So yeah, I just have to come up with that text. Even that was their concept, this whole at 50 series thing. Like I've done a David Bowie, I've done a Bowie at 75, right? Right. And I've got a Kiss at 50 coming, right?
Oh, nice.
But yeah, so that's all their concept. I mean, the challenge for me, I love coming up with the 50. That's the fun part. And then there's a little back and forth on that. And sometimes Dennis is thinking with his photo hat on, thinking I can't get pictures of that, maybe pick a different one or whatever. But, the challenge for me is keeping the word count down to what they want, right?
Oh, right.
In so many cases, right? So it's like you want to write more and you're frustrated and you're very limited in what you can do with this thing. But I inject my opinion in there from time to time and some decent writing once in a while, and so
personal stories in there too. Yeah,
a little bit. Yeah.
Well, so one thing that Mick was explaining to us, because Mick has gotten sideways with some of his subjects over the years, and he's like, look, I don't care about their feelings, I don't care about what's going on in their head. The only person I care about is the reader and their experience reading this book. Whereas I've seen you, obviously you care about the reader, but I've also seen some quotes with you saying, you know what, I don't want to make their family feel bad about, this rock star or shine them in too poor of a light. I mean, what is going through your head when you have to be brutally honest, but you don't have to be a jerk about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, well, this is about different career highlights. So that's kind of stuff is not going to come up too often. But, frankly, across all the books I've done like 115 books, right? So, most of that stuff that I have to wrestle with and get me in trouble, I don't even have anyways. I don't even have that information, right? All the gossip stuff, right? And the other thing is I've always been across those books, I really like talking about the records, right? So it's like every song, the album cover, the production, the lyrics, the guitar playing, what studio they're at. That's the stuff I love the most and want to get in there the most. So that's always what I make a beeline for, kind of thing, right? That's what I really want. So yeah, but I'm sure Mick is really, he might be talking that game, but I mean, I'm sure he doesn't want to make enemies of people who are friends or get sued or like just burn a bridge and can't ever talk to that band ever again. That crosses through every journalist's mind, right?
Now, you mentioned at the beginning of this book that AC/DC is your favorite band. Was there any difference in writing this book, knowing that?
That goes up and down all the time. Like on any given day, I'll have a different favorite band. But I mean, it's usually a cycle of 4 or 5. It's not crazy out of control. But no, I mean, I fortunately to be able to write the book, I'm not one of these Bon Scott era only guys. There's a lot of that. And I am that guy for a lot of bands. Def Leppard would be one, first 3 albums, that's it. And I'm just disgusted by them after that. Right. And 90s Aerosmith and things like that. Right. So I am that guy for a bunch of bands. But I'm not for AC/DC. And, I rank Flick of the Switch as my 3rd favorite AC/DC album. So yeah, no, it was a fun book to write for that reason, because I do have this long history. I got into them in, I guess it was 77. Well, yeah, I'm sure it was 77 because that's when I got my first as a new release would have been Let There Be Rock. And I bought the Canadian High Voltage at the same time in 1977. So.
On a family vacation across country, yeah.
Exactly, in Winnipeg, yeah. Looking at this record, saying, "Oh, why is there just one guy? You know, they don't look like they're really rocking out on the front cover." And it's a song called "Bad Boy Boogie." It's got "Boogie" in the title. How good is this going to be? That logo looks a little old school, and I'm thinking this looks like it might not be particularly heavy, but we got it home, right? And it was, as I always tell the story, it was the third album ever. Well, it might have been the second, because I don't know when the Sex Pistols came out in 77, but it was one of the first three albums that had no mellow songs on it, like nothing we called a lousy,
right,
in our nomenclature, right? So it was literally every song was heavy, although we were a little suspicious of Problem Child. We thought that was a little poppy, so it might be right on the edge, right? But yeah, it was that and the Sex Pistols and Rainbow Rising were the first three, right?
Oh, so good. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we're going to tear into this book a little bit and talk some AC/DC here with you. But first, I have a small bone to pick with you, Mr. Writer Martin Popoff, if that is your real name. So, of course, we all have to be active on social media, whether we want to be or not. And I come across this article in Goldmine magazine.
Yep.
It's about the top 20 supergroups of all time.
Okay.
And actually, the way I came across it, we are, when I was based in the UK, we did a lot of prog stuff, which is a very British, in my opinion, a very British subgenre of rock. And some of the greats, Genesis, King Crimson, yes, Pink Floyd, on and on, they hail from the UK. And we have done a lot of work with Yes and Asia, interviewing some of their people and promoting some of their stuff. And one of my followers, or someone I follow, it's like, hey, look, John Wetton was in 3 of these top 20 bands of all time, including UK, who you put up, pretty high. King Crimson also, awfully high on the list, obviously. But number 20 was Asia out of all these bands. Okay, the first album alone puts them in the top 10, Martin, okay? Number 1 selling album in America in 1982, okay? Some of these other ones you have on here, all of their records put together does add up to the sales of Asia, not to mention the cultural impact of Heat of the Moment, perhaps the greatest pop rock song of the early 80s and one of the greatest of all time. Now explain yourself, sir.
Well, I think there's got to be a rewriting that's got to happen about that album being way too overrated, right? And then things going down. I don't like the production. I find the production noisy. And John Wetton's kind of pushing a lot of air on these weird songs. And the King Crimson that I put up there, I think I put it number 1.
That's right.
Was the red, blue, and yellow King Crimson specifically, right? Mm-hmm. It was that version of them as a super group, but
that's right.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel that album, probably we romanticize it a little too much. I like UK better. So.
All right. Well, we'll just have to set that to the side. Now, look, we know that Asia was really just a point in time, right? And in 1982, the record industry was down. 1983, boom, it exploded. But 1982, I mean, the record sales overall were down, and it gave room for something like an Asia to be pushed in there by an ambitious David Geffen, right? And
I was unaware of that. I always bring up 1979 as being a down year, and that's I've done many shows about that, but I didn't know that really about 82.
Yeah, I learned that later because whenever I tell people that Asia was the number 1 selling album in America in 82, they're like, what? That can't be right. And they scramble to the internet to find out that I'm right. And they're like, huh? Because 83 and 84 was Thriller. 85 was Born in the USA. And then you start to get stuff like Whitney Houston. And, 1980 was like Pink Floyd and, Elton John and stuff like that. Huge names that are, of course, known by everybody. And everyone's like,
interesting.
Who even was in Asia? What song did they have? Like, it was Heat of the Moment, cretins. But,
Now, was that a particularly recessionary year, or just by coincidence, no huge bands put out an album that year?
I'm not exactly sure what all the different pieces of the puzzle were. I mean, I know MTV comes out in 1981, and that changes some things. And then, certain smaller bands who may not have even gotten a sniff are now going gold and platinum just because they're on MTV. But yeah, no, I mean, I guess, you saw the end of the Pink Floyds and the end of the Led Zeppelins, and there's no more Deep Purple. Aerosmith is on the outs. The huge bands of the 70s are kind of gone. And now we're just starting to get the wave of the 80s coming back up here, right? So
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was just kind of a void. It was just kind of a weird in-between void, because I don't remember, I was not into, finances in 1982, but I don't remember any big recession talks in that time.
Yeah, I think interest rates were 14% or something for a little while there, right? They got
crazy.
really
but that's
high.
the dawn of the Reagan era, and things
Mhm.
starting to take off as far as the stock market and the economy and all that. And then a lot of things hit in 83. Journey's, Frontiers hit, and obviously Michael Jackson's Thriller is the big one, but your boys Def Leppard had a big one, and Duran Police, Synchronicity was huge. People like Duran Duran and Men at Work and the Rhythmics were still, coming up in a big way. And so that whole 80s techno new wave, new romantics, whatever they want to call that was really starting to boom. Thanks a lot to MTV. But the old big stadium rockers of the 70s were kind of all gone at this point, unless, eventually ZZ Top starts to reinvent themselves thanks to MTV and a little slick production of their own, kind of.
Yeah, ZZ is 83, and that does amazing. But in 82, Scorpions did as good as, almost as good as they were ever going to get. Blackout was big.
Right.
Judas Priest had Screaming for Vengeance, which was big. Ozzy had an 80 and an 81, which were big, but they sat out 82.
Mm-hmm.
Black Sabbath, Mob Rules did okay. Eventually went gold. So they were doing okay. Blue Oyster Cult is now sitting one out because they did well in 81 with Fire of Unknown Origin.
Fire of Unknown Origin, yeah.
AC/DC is doing well with For Those About to Rock, which is, a bust compared to the previous one, but still
right.
doing well. I mean, and then we've got Def Leppard in 81 and then in 83. So yeah, interesting. And then I guess what you're saying is we wouldn't find any of the big, bands that I don't know anything about, the big non-metal bands.
Mm-hmm.
Yes is sitting out all the way from 80 all the way to 83.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. So 83 was big. And so for whatever 82 was just a little weak overall. And then Asia does well for Geffen, and he forces them back into the studio, like make another one in 83 at Le Studio in your home country there. And yeah, it's not good because they rushed it. They forced it. The videos were good, but they didn't let them take time to gel. And so eventually that was kind of the end of Asia after that. So I know that for most people, Asia's a non-entity. It's just for us, the two of us, me and Jackson, special place in our hearts. So I just had to give you a hard time. That's all.
That's fine.
Hi, this is Carl Palmer, and you're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf.
But no, let's get into why we're here in this big, beautiful book of AC/DC at 50. You're right in that you talk throughout here how the Youngs are a little closed off. It's not like everybody knows everything about them like so many of the other big bands or other people who have a record that sold 50 million copies, right? What was it like trying to dive in to try to get some of these facts? I mean, obviously you're not talking to them so much, so where are you finding all this good stuff from?
Wow. Well, there have been a lot of AC/DC books out there and the internet and all that. But, on this subject, this pathology of these guys, it's like they had a pretty rough upbringing, and then they had to emigrate far away and all that. And then they come up and they see, the corruption of their brothers and other bands in Australia. They're all like seasoned veterans in terms of what they've seen coming up. And then they have to deal with being basically a poor band from 1973 through to about 1978. Mm-hmm. So they've had even a hard time. The rise was not super fast either, right? So and I also have another sort of theory about this is more along the lines of why you don't see a lot of these guys do interviews, right? Number one, they do look at the downside and say, oh, I got to watch what I say or whatever. Now these guys, they are kind of closed off, and so they're smart about what they say. But I have a funny theory about AC/DC. I mean, AC/DC, it's not that they didn't do any interviews, but they're known for not having done a ton of interviews, sure. Right? And I often wonder if after a while they realize it's really hard to talk about our kind of music in particular. I mean, there ain't much to the music, there ain't much to the lyrics. What do we talk about, right? It's not Tales from Topographic Oceans, right? So I bet after a little while they go, I'm just running out of things to say. I'm sick and tired of hearing myself say Chuck Berry or whatever. Right. And you really wonder about that. And other guys I've noticed that I remember seeing a Prince interview and realizing I can see why this guy doesn't do interviews, because he's not very articulate, right? He just basically has got no insight about what he's doing, right? So I'm sure some of these guys realize also, I'm just not good at this, right?
Maybe, but Brian Johnson is a pretty engaging guy, and quick with a joke, and you think, well, you could get a lot from him, but it just doesn't seem like you get a lot about those guys from him. It's about more his experience, right?
There's two things there, I bet, though. So number one, he's probably somewhat instructed or learned through the corporate culture of the don't say any bad stuff about us. I mean, we're your meal ticket, we're your job and all that. And we are a secretive bunch and we do circle the wagons. That's number one. Number two, I've noticed with these guys over time, as they get so famous, it's just a natural thing that happens to the human brain for these hallowed few, is that they get so famous that they start to, it becomes like a second nature to make sure that you don't say anything too controversial, because it's so important when you open your mouth. Right. So all of these guys become much, much more politically correct and wily and canny over time. And Brian Johnson strikes me a little bit like that over time, where you can just see him be, it looks like it's all super off the cuff and all this stuff, but it's like, wait a minute, did he really say anything there? Or even Rob Halford. Sometimes I always complain about him, like he's so polite and elegant and all this, but he can use a lot of words to say nothing. Right?
That's right.
So.
Well, it's interesting because we got a chance to talk to Chris Slade a little bit, and he made some comments about how, make no mistake, Malcolm Young is in charge of everything, up to and including, here's what you're going to play. I understand it was different because he came in as not an original member of the band, but I kind of get the feeling, even from reading this book, that there's always that, the Malcolm Young eye is on everything, and everything has to get run past him, and he was the gatekeeper, and you did it his way or that was it. So maybe you're right. Johnson just knows you say something nice or it's going to be very uncomfortable for you.
Yeah, and it's so weird. It's like all these guys have to do is make 35 minutes of this really simple music every 3 or 4 or 5 years or even more, right? So it's like what they really have to do. And that's why I do admire them for that whole, you hear these stories about them sitting down and agonizing over all that stuff, right? And having songs that don't make the album, but not that many. It's not like I've heard stories about Aerosmith coming to the table with 32 songs to come up with what's going to go on their album and stuff. And then you hear these B-sides and unreleased songs and they're like completely finished. They're like aircraft carriers of songs, right? They're just so considered, right? But you do hear the odd story of them just sitting there and going over and getting that groove going and trying these songs at different speeds and things like that, right? And playing with the parts. That's really cool. That at least when they're making this short amount of music, very simple music, they're really really putting their heart and soul into it to do. But but the reality of their lives is that they're essentially live performers, right? So we all, that's the other thing that I always find funny in interviews. It's like sometimes you feel like you're not talking on the same wavelength to these guys, when you bring up some ancient album of theirs, right? And you start hitting them up with memories of it and stuff. And it's like, well, the only songs I remember from it are the 3 we play live all the time. I don't remember any of the rest of it, right? So
And like
that's
you said,
their job. So,
and like you said too, maybe you were thinking it's this artistic vision or something. Maybe it's not. Maybe we're just there to, like you said, play these songs, hammer them out, and play them live, and then just move on with your life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I swear. Yeah. In a general sense, in a trend, in a generalizing way, these guys think way less of their albums than we do. Right? As being the important thing in their lives, right? As being like what I do every day, breathing, walk, and playing live, all of that stuff is way more of their identity than just that record.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, being that most all of them, at least their origin is from the UK, from Great Britain, it seemed like making it in Britain was their goal. It was kind of more of a big deal coming from Australia than it was to make it in America. Not that they didn't want to make it in America, and that got pushed back a couple of times for various reasons. But it was like that was the goal. Like, we'll tour Australia, but then the real thing to do is let's go break it in London. Let's go break it back in Glasgow, or back in Scotland, where they hail from, which would be the entree to Europe, and then maybe America was after that. You didn't get too much into that, but is that true?
Yeah, I mean, that was familiar to them. They got signed out of Britain. So that's another thing. Or like signed, outside of Australia and Britain. And then I think the other interesting thing about it is they just seemed to have their ear to the ground, and they knew it was kind of happening over there. There was the whole punk thing, and then we know all that. There's that probably overspoken story about them. Oh, can they be slotted in with punks and all that? But what I really like also is that they really are, because of this this often being in Britain thing, they really are almost an honorary new wave of British heavy metal band. I've done various audio shows and video shows about honorary new wave of British heavy metal bands, right? And they definitely seem to be one of those. They seem to really be part of that scene, even though they're from Australia.
Well, they had the sound, right? They toured with some of those guys, and their first albums are coming out around the same time. But we got to talk a little bit about record company issues and the releases and all that kind of stuff, because it's a little fakakta. I mean, it's not that rare for a band to release an album that has a different track in the US versus in Europe or whatever. But as far as things would come out in Australia and then they wouldn't get released in the US, or they would get released for UK, Europe, but it would be different and then have a different cover. And then it would be a few years. We can talk all day about the Dirty Deeds record, and that kind of thing there. But that's a big part of their story that I don't think a lot of people understand. As far as, for the most bands, I mean, any of the bands you've done books about, you have one album, maybe it doesn't come out at the exact same time, but for the most part, it comes out around the same time. And then you go on to the next one, whereas that's not the case for AC/DC at all, really.
Yeah, I mean, and it's smart they did it that way too, really only because of the debut. The debut is really wobbly, the original Australian High Voltage. But after that, your TNT and your Dirty Deeds and are basically the AC/DC sound. I mean, I consider those two to go together. And then Let There Be Rock turns it up a notch. It's much more powerfully produced, and maybe the songs are better. It's way more in your face sort of thing. It actually seems less commercial to me than the North American High Voltage. But yeah, so that happens. This all happened with another band I love a lot from down there as well, Angel City, or the Angels, right? They had a mess of the releases like that as well. But yeah, different album covers, swapping a song or two off of them. So the High Voltage was a compilation. Let There Be Rock is more or less intact, except for I think one switch. Right. And then Power Age has different mix, slightly different cover. They're all having different covers, kind of thing. And then the big deal, of course, is that whole thing when Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap comes out after Back in Black and confuses everybody, and Bon Scott's dead and he's on this one, and they get ticked off about it, and that causes a break with management, and they're mad at the label and all that stuff. But then it sells like crazy. I mean, it was a good business move bringing that out.
Or would it have been a good business move bringing it out when it was supposed to come out? And what was that, 76? It was supposed to come out 77, something like that.
Yeah, well, you never know. I mean, you're just a baby band, and it's a hard sell. I mean, it's not the most. Well, I mean, it's pretty darn commercial in a weird way. I mean, they're a very commercial band, but they're on their own. They're the only ones doing this kind of thing, right? But yeah, it's totally accessible. There's nothing inaccessible about it at all. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that version of High Voltage was a perfect step forward. I mean, it was just a bunch of all the really good songs all put together from that sort of era, from that 2-album era. And it was a smart thing to do. So you had that, and then you had Let There Be Rock, and then you had Power Age, and it seemed to be pretty much good stuff. I mean, my favorite album of theirs in total is either on any given day Power Age or Highway to Hell. So yeah, it was that
late 70s,
totally accessible
end of the Bon Scott era. That's you. That's when you were growing up. You're riding home on your bike with them strapped to the back, still hasn't changed. Yeah,
I'd say so. Yeah, love Highway to Hell. We just in the AC/DC songs ranking recently on a buddy of mine's show, and I had Touch Too Much and Walk All Over You as my top 2 favorite AC/DC songs. Love them to death. Yeah, I think that's as good as it gets. Back in Black's pretty good too. I'm not a big fan of the next one, but yeah, I'd say Flick of the Switch, things pick up better there. Then it starts to go downhill again.
Right.
So. I was going to say, I do love Highway to Hell. You can't badmouth that at all, but Touch Too Much. They always have the thing about how, what's the greatest first line of a song. That's pretty good when he's talking about one of those nights where you turn out the lights and everything comes into view.
Yeah.
Yippers. One of the things you said too in the book was flick the switch. And I've never really listened to that a whole bunch, once or twice, but I think now I'm going to have to go back and really take a listen to that, because you definitely sold it as being an underrated gem in the catalog.
Yeah, flick of the switch is basically, people kind of put down the production a little. It is a little raw, it is a little mid-rangey, but it's super heavy. It sounds confident. That's the other thing with a lot of these albums and bands. If you're on board and you're championing them, any shortcomings, it's like, well, you go, well, they know what they're doing. They have confidence. I have confidence in them. And sometimes you don't have confidence in AC/DC. Like I think Blow Up Your Video, I don't have confidence in the band.
Right.
But yeah, Flick of the Switch is like their Cool Again album, right? They're like, For Those About to Rock was a little corporate. And they're kind of not cool again, even though it's right in the middle of the new wave British heavy metal. But in 1983 with Flick of the Switch, it's like they can compete again, and they're bad boys again. And Scorpions is now starting to be not very cool with Love at First Sting, right? So like these guys are they're outlaws. They went and produced this themselves, and that weird album cover that is not trying to be awesome, right? It's just They totally have confidence, and that's that was a great part of that record.
But that's a cool part of the book too, is you really explain kind of what was going on at the time, about what they had come from having great commercial success, but I don't really like that. They were tired of maybe the Mutt Langs of the world just beating things to death. They wanted raw. They wanted, like you said, to be bad boys again. So Malcolm says, I'm going to produce this thing, which, as you point out, you were saying something about how you need a producer for the bullshit meter on the songs, to sniff that out. But it explains why you got what you got on that record.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly fine. I just try to. It just seems quite often people bring up the production, and now I keep bringing it up. But to me, it sounds perfectly okay. I've never really felt that way, at the time. But yeah, it's just definitely got some good rockers on it. It's very, very electric sounding, and so you get the evolution of Mutt Lange into his basically obsessive, weird, almost like mental illness level, right? Def Leppard is going to run headlong into that. There's just no way AC/DC could have done another album with him. They realized they were fed up on For Those About to Rock. It's like he was already too far gone, and he was only 40% of where he was going to get to, right? So there he's essentially the Mutt Lange of High and Dry. And then fortunately, they never got to see the Mutt Lange of Pyromania
or Hysteria, which, if you've ever been to your own Wikipedia page, Martin, there's a big chunk of it about how you give Hysteria 0 out of 10 stars.
Yeah, that gets brought up all the time. That's for sure. Yeah.
Poor Def Leppard with their diamond selling record. And 0 stars from Martin Popoff.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure they're very concerned.
What do they care what I think? Yeah, exactly.
But
there's a neat video of Joe Elliott on the bus a year or two ago, and he's got my David Bowie book, and he's showing it. Oh, it's one of the new things I bought. This is so cool. It's like, I'm going, I wonder if he knows who that is. Book, right? It's like, I no longer like this book. Yeah. And over the years, it's funny. It's like I always wanted to make sure any chance I had I could get any Def Leppard interviews, I better get them, because one day they're going to stop giving me interviews. And then I noticed about 10 years ago, on perfectly normal situations where they probably should have been talking to me about something, I got to know, right? And I'm thinking, now they know.
I finally read that review. Yeah, all right. No, but what was interesting to me was because, honestly, I came in, when Back in Black came out, I was like 7, right? Me and Jackson were 7. So obviously we listened to classic rock. It gets into our brains over the years. When we turned teenagers in the late 80s, it's must-have listens. And so everyone of my generation then, they knew Highway to Hell because it's got the big title track. It's the last Bon Scott album. It sold very well. It's kind of got that Mutt initial good production on it. Everyone knows Back in Black. But in reading the book, it seems that the real AC/DC heads, the ones who really appreciated them their whole careers, they really looked to Let There Be Rock, which you might consider to be about their best maybe. And then Powerage, which to me really gets overlooked because it's right before, the last big one with Bon, and then obviously Back in Black comes after that. So Power Age gets overlooked quite a bit, and it took it a while to register as like gold and platinum and double platinum. All that really needed the sales of the next two to kind of get them to the next place. But I mean, you still, despite the commerciality of Highway to Hell and Back in Black, I think you would still put those two as sonically maybe better than those. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my thoughts on those records are, and a lot of people love Power Age. I mean, a lot of big AC/DC fans. I mean, generally, I'm of the consensus of most AC/DC fans that Power Age, Highway to Hell are the best. And I think Power Age is kind of like laid back, charming. It's a little Southern rocking. It's a little simple. Even the heavy songs on it, like Kicked in the Teeth, was pretty simple. Rock and Roll Damnation, I remember when that came out as an advanced single, we were horrified. It was so poppy, right? We're really worried about it, right? And the production is, it also is the warmest and the most charming between those two records. To me, I have this happen all the time. And I went on Pete Pardo's Sea of Tranquility, which I do every Friday morning. And we did a show about how I always seem to have this boring trend of falling into loving late 70s stuff and not so much the early 70s stuff. And to me, as you get earlier, I get kind of depressed by old albums. And to me, Let There Be Rock feels to me a little bit like Volume 4 feels to me by Black Sabbath. I just find it a little bit too nasty and humorless and cold over time. I've always loved it, but I mean, it's fallen down a little bit for me. And then when you get to Highway to Hell, you get basically just a good, correct production with no personality to it. There's no real Mutt Lange to it. It's just basically all the sounds are dialed in properly. Right. But that's them being kind of like way more professional. That's the big thing Mutt brought to it, is he made them routine things more, and he got the backing vocals better and all that sort of stuff. Right. So that's it. It's the most professional of those three, right? And then the second most professional of those three is Let There Be Rock, and then the third most is Power Age. Power Age is like let your hair down. It seems like they're having a couple of beers making that record, right? And the other two don't sound like.
Well, and there's something to be said about a fourth record too. I mean, and everyone's like, you got your whole life to write your first record, and so every hit, every good thing, everything you've got goes to that first one. Then you got 3 months to maybe 6 months to write the second. There's definitely a sophomore slump to a lot of them. And then a third album could be like, okay, now we're trying to find our new way. And then fourth can be really make or break, like your compatriots Rush. If they hadn't made 2112, we wouldn't be talking about Rush today. We didn't know who they are, right? And so that Let There Be Rock was that time, like, okay, now we're not just kids from Australia anymore. We've been to a few places. We've reworked our sound. We know what works. We know which songs the crowds kind of like and which ones that they don't. So this is us trying to forge, all right, here's what we believe we are. And so it's kind of the foundation of everything that comes after.
Although they change again on Power Age, which is the funny thing. I mean, the big thing about Let There Be Rock, the big personality of it is the massive molten guitars, right? It's just so distorted sounding, that record. It's kind of like Flick of the Switch, basically. So it's got these huge guitars. The songs, again, the songs are a little cold and humorless, right? They're a little snarly. Right. And then that changes again, and then they change again, and then they get, and then when Brian comes in, I remember when Brian came in, there was absolute 100% acceptance of him. Everybody loved it. Everybody loved Back in Black. There's no problem at all with him coming in. But it's funny. So back then, that was actually still considered heavy metal. And, when you think back and you think of why was it heavy metal? I mean, number one, it's distortion pedal guitar all the way through. I mean, there's no ballads. But the other thing is his voice was almost even more extreme and more metal than Bond's was, in a way. I mean, it's quite a shriek.
In a way, yeah.
That, right. So it's like you had this really transgressive vocalist. It's like when I think back to why did I ever like, because it was the first rock and roll I ever heard. I remember like when I was 6 and 7, I started getting into music and I heard like Steppenwolf and Three Dog Night and CCR. And I'm thinking, why did I like Steppenwolf and CCR at all? Right. And it's because they had a heavy metal vocal. Everything else wasn't heavy, but they had a rough and tumble bad boy kind of vocal snarl thing. And then when we did all those Metal Evolution episodes at Banger Films, when we did that whole series, we explored that a little more. And you realize that as a kid, vocals can be heavy metal and it can tilt a band to heavy just by having a heavy vocalist.
One thing that you brought up in the book was people who were considered for the job, and one was Noddy Holder from Slade. And that just got me thinking, well, what would that have sounded like with him up there instead of Brian Johnson?
Well,
It's not the rock on tour though.
It would have sounded good. I mean, they would have said, "Lose the clothes right away. We got to do a fashion makeover on you." That's for sure,
Probably.
right? They would have done that immediately. Sure, yeah, it would have sounded good. We know that. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think that's definitely a band that never caught on in the United States was Slade.
Yeah. And I love still to this day, I've every time it comes up that Brian's in danger of being not an AC/DC anymore, I still think Mark Storace is just the perfect choice from Crocus, right? But I remember talking to him at length about it, and his whole thing was, we were as big as they were. Why would I leave my band for that band? I love my guys. We were as big as they were in 1979, 1980, right? There's no reason to leave. It would have been a lateral move. And ticking off all his buddies.
And certainly nobody would have expected Back in Black to perform like it did.
No.
Well, it had a great story going in, and there's a lot of excitement around this band. So I think the thing that when you say they wouldn't have expected it is there could have been wholesale rejection of this new singer business idea, right?
Right. And that's the two things about it that strike me on Back in Black is A, as you mentioned, there isn't wholesale rejection. There isn't David Lee Roth versus Sammy Hagar kind of thing. Part of that is David is still alive and he has his own band competing, whereas Bond's gone. So if you want the band to continue, there has to be somebody. But the other part of it is Brian didn't write songs in Geordie. And hearing him on the Rock on Tours with Guy Pratt and Gary Kemp, who've been on our show, it's like the first song he ever wrote in his life was You Shook Me All Night Long. What? So not only are we, replacing this iconic bad boy rock singer with someone who is relatively unknown to the world, but he's writing his first songs ever, and they become a double diamond 50 million selling album. Who saw that coming?
Yeah, and people often parse and complain and break it down and say, oh, Brian didn't, wasn't quite the poet that Bond was. And sure, that's fine. But, we got to realize mixed into all this is all the murkiness of, wow, Malcolm and Angus are probably involved in the lyrics too, right? And then later, all of them basically more so. And then who knows who else is kind of throwing in lines and helping, right? But the point is as a kid, I mean, it just seemed like business as usual at the lyric end. It seemed like we're just getting more of the same thing.
Yeah. Now I've got a question. Well, first of all, a couple cool things, because again, there's also this great detail in the books, right? And you get to learn things that you didn't know before. One that I thought was cool was the Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap line comes from a cartoon that Angus used to watch as a kid, where there's a character on the Beanie and Cecil cartoon called Dishonest John that had a business card that said Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap on it. Like, that's where that came from, the kids' cartoon.
Pretty cool.
That's brilliant, yeah. But one I actually have to ask you, Jackson, is what I didn't realize is because they got a foothold in Texas in the 70s, did some gigs down there, especially in San Antonio, where Jackson used to live. Said there was a DJ, Joe Anthony, who made San Antonio basically a hard rock, heavy metal capital in the 70s. I had no idea about that, because you think about Texas, they could be hardcore country or they could be hardcore. I ain't listening to that. But did you know about this guy, Jackson?
I didn't know about that guy, but it was very weird because I moved there in 2000 and I was with you. I'm like, well, we're going to have to pick from country or Western down here. But no, it was a big rock town. So I didn't know the history of it. But it's definitely true. There's a lot of hard rock guys down there. He was, as far as I knew, he was gone by the time I got there, but that spirit definitely still lived on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, basically, Budgie's fondest memories of America at all are playing in Texas and being superstars there. Saxon did great in Texas.
Yeah.
And Moxie up here. I mean, that's the only place in all of America. Moxie from Toronto did great. They got huge crowds down there. So basically, and I think that's where there might even be a Moxie story in the book. And maybe I got Earl mentioning this. I think I do have mentioned.
Oh, yeah. I read
it. So basically AC/DC backed up Moxie, right, down there.
Right.
And not only Budgie, but I mean, there were a number of, or Saxon and Budgie, but there were a number of new wave of British heavy metal bands who said, that was our biggest market down there, where we were treated somewhat as heroes and got huge crowds.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was the first time I'd ever heard of both of those. Saxon and Moxie was when I got there, and people would talk about them. I never even heard of these bands before. So yeah, definitely still percolating around as a real, true rock and roll kind of safe place in the middle of the country.
Yeah. Neat.
All right. So you get into the 80s, right? Back in Black's huge. For Those About to Rock has the big title track, but is not an amazing album beyond that. It ends up selling pretty well, but not nearly compared to, Back in Black. It's like after Fleetwood Mac does Rumors, who cares if they sell 6 million copies of Tusk? It's not Rumors, kind of thing. And then, yeah, like you say, they start to self-produce a little bit. Maybe Brian doesn't deliver the goods on the lyrics. When you go through some of that Fly on the Wall, Flick of the Switch, Blow Up Your Video. I like Heat Seeker, but most of the rest of it was kind of So like the 80s, they're titans, but they're kind of trading on their past, right? A little bit. Although, and you bring it up in the book, all these things kind of go platinum and then that's it. Or they go gold and then eventually they kind of get to platinum and that's it. However, Who Made Who? With basically one new song on it, and then it's kind of a compilation, not quite a greatest hits. But so two-part question, how in the world, I guess it sold well because it was a semi-greatest hits, and then it also has one pretty good new song on it with Who Made Who, with the inestimable Emilio Estevez starring in the film Maximum Overdrive, which kids my age at the time, I'm a teenager, we're digging that. You're a little older at that point, like, this is crap. Why would they even do this? Well, it's because Stephen King, another notoriously prolific writer and a musician, dug AC/DC, right? You told the story. He went down to Compass Point to see them, how they're doing, some of these songs on it. But do you know why they said we're never going to do a greatest hits album?
Not exactly. I mean, so a couple things here. So I think that whole stance was a little bit of we're a band from the street. We're trying to be anti-commercial. It's putting up this whole narrative that we are absolutely a working class band and that thing is ripping off our fans and all this sort of thing. So okay. I'm pretty sure it's that, but it was great. That song is an excellent song. So it's, and they're still a pretty big band at this point. They still are a gold and platinum act. So this thing comes out and it's associated with a movie, and it's right in the middle of a hair metal, and a lot of albums are selling a lot. So it's almost like the old formula from the mid 70s with a band like Sweet, where let's just put out a standalone single sort of thing. It's this song that just gets them news, right, for a while. So it's an amazing song. And, dare I say, it might even be the song that sets up, the great success of the Razor's Edge.
Maybe.
Again, where there's still residual excitement about
that guitar bit is kind of a precursor, I would say, to Thunderstruck.
Yeah.
A little bit.
And I've also, I went through this whole, I won't do the whole boring story, but on my podcast, I explained this whole thing about how basically through the 80s, AC/DC was touring Back in Black because every time you went out, even with a new album shortly thereafter, you were actually, on Blow Up Your Video or on Fly on the Wall, a few months into the tour, you were selling more copies of Back in Black than you were of the current album.
That's
right. It's like, well, that's kind of what you're pushing because the record label doesn't care. It's still $7.99. It's one record.
It's a unit. It doesn't matter what the unit is. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like you're out on tour, and if you literally are more successful in promoting an album that's 3 records ago, that's great. Just keep promoting it. Yeah,
exactly. Well, and I don't want to talk badly about Simon Wright, but I mean, he was not Phil Rudd. He might have been okay live, but I don't think in the studio he really did anything to really up the level. But then when you get to Razor's Edge and you get to Chris Slade, who has been on our show and who has played with an amazing number of legends over the years, he did bring something pretty special to it. You even remark about the book, it's like, even compared to Phil, he's providing some kind of really heavy backbeat there that really lets Malcolm and Angus do their thing.
Hi guys, this is Chris Slade, drummer of AC/DC and many others, and you're listening to the really ugly Werewolf in London.
It's natural to say that is down to him and whatever Simon's shortcomings are down to Simon.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is you listen to Simon on Dio albums and he's great.
He's pretty darn good.
He's technical and he's got great groove and all this. So it's almost like in this particular band, any of our praise or dissatisfaction with any drummer is almost like 33% the drummer, 33% the producer and 33% what Angus and Malcolm want, right?
Right.
So if they're telling him to do 4 on the floor and take that fill out or whatever, or just less cymbals or something, or whatever, right? Or here's, I want 2 bass drum beats here instead of 1, or what, and that could be anybody telling him to do that. So I don't go for this romanticizing of Phil Rudd. I just think all of them could have done whatever, right? And it's this whole thing that I really get upset when people say some prog drummer, but you can't do Ringo Starr. There's a magic of Ringo. That prog drummer could do Ringo Starr in his sleep, and he could do like 5 versions of Ringo Starr in one song, and you wouldn't be able to tell which is. And you'd say these 2 are better than Ringo's performance, and these 3 are worse, or whatever. But it's like, oh, you want Ringo? Yeah, I'll give you Ringo. And there's no, this whole thing about you can't do Peter Criss or something, right? Mm-hmm. They can. So like to be able to just give what AC/DC needs, it's like literally down to, I mean, it could even be what amplifiers the guitarists are using, or where you want to put the guitars in the mix this time out, right? Are they a little higher than the drums? Are they a little lower? It's like, and then all of a sudden we're thinking, oh, the drums sound great and powerful. It's like, well, they didn't do anything different, really. They turned the guitars up or whatever, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's the simplest job in all of rock, right? I mean, literally is.
Yeah.
Drumming for AC/DC for a drummer is the simplest. I can't think of a simpler. I don't even think Fleetwood Mac's simpler. Fleetwood Mac and Eagles I always put down as well. And I think Don Henley's just a terrible drummer, right? Anyway,
he's just busy singing. He was, he just needed to keep the beat so his vocals sounded good. Yeah, that's all he needed to do.
Well, they had bad production too from what's his name,
Simzik Johns. So you don't like Simzik's production?
Nah, I find all those albums just sound cardboardy and humorless and unimaginative and just nothing.
But there. Wasn't he following their direction? I mean, do you compare them versus
again? Same thing, right? Who knows? Who knows when you get a production who made it that way, right?
Yeah, but Glyn Johns is more like, no, we're not doing what you want. We're doing what I want. We're putting the echo on, and I'm doing the drums this way. So they fire him. They bring in Simzik because he would do exactly what they wanted. Right. But are they better? I don't know.
Yeah. And then there's an engineer, right? Sometimes the engineer is the secret weapon, right?
Jackson's my secret weapon.
Yeah, well, at least I can do something. To stick up for Chris Slade, he was the one that came up with the idea of mounting the 2 bass drums by his head. And whether that was actually part of the recording, I don't know, but it definitely looked cool. And it definitely had that extra rock. It just, the showmanship to that was always pretty cool to me.
But that really cool production sound and that tightness and everything on that. I mean, it's probably, I would almost say it's more Bruce Fairbairn's vision than Chris Slade's vision.
I'm sure.
I mean, Chris didn't come into AC/DC sounding like that or saying, this is what I want to do, right?
That's right.
He's like an old dude, right? So it's like there's no way. I mean, I'm sure that was a Bruce Fairbairn thing, but then when I think about it, it's like Bruce Fairbairn is still really pretty young at that point. He hasn't done a lot of. Well, I guess not. I mean,
he's a few things.
He's been around for 10 years. Yeah, I'm thinking. Yeah, sorry, I'm thinking. Yeah, he's actually got a lot under his belt by that point. Yeah. But it all doesn't sound like that either. That's the other thing.
No, but this is the album that put them back on top to stay, right? Because they had some misfires on those albums. They come out thunderstruck, epic, one of the greatest songs they ever do. Plus, they go to Donington, play live, and then they do AC/DC Live, which becomes their de facto greatest hits album. Now, you say, hey, nobody really was excited about it. But that's not true because we were in college at the time living together. And I remember the day it came out, getting up and going to the record store, couldn't afford the double album. My buddy Rob from Boston, he bought it and he lorded it over me because it had the Angus Buck in it. But it was the first time you had recordings really of Brian doing Bond stuff and to have them all in one place, and visually, thanks to Chris, they're exciting behind the drums and Angus running around the whole stage. So the sales of both of those kind of put them back up. And it was right before grunge hit, right? So they didn't get mixed in with everybody who got thrown out with grunge. They were then, grandfathered in, not only from the stuff they did in the 70s and Back in Black, but it's like, but they're still relevant now because they got this Razor's Edge, which is their best effort in years. Yeah,
and it really is. I mean, it's a really lively album. And the other band that has that freak career pattern is Ozzy, right? With Osmosis at that point, right? Grunge is coming in, boom, you have a massive hit, right? bigger than your last two albums, right? Exactly the
That's
same as
right.
AC/DC. So yeah, and it was beautifully recorded. Yeah, and the drumming's great on it, and the songs are snappy, and there's a lot of variety on there. There's some slow ones, some fast ones, some jokey ones, a Christmas tune. It's got everything. And the only thing missing is an apostrophe in the Razor's Edge, right? It's the only crappy thing about it. So, and another bad album cover, right? We do these album cover shows, and it's like Foreigner, AC/DC, and Def Leppard have the worst album covers of everybody. So
I know some people who will fight with you on that. In fact, I've got to set up a show between you, our buddy Neil from Def Lep Pod, and your countryman Chris from My Rock and Roll Heaven. He's at Rock These Treats. Those two are the two biggest Def Leppard fans on the planet. I would love to just throw up just a few questions that don't really matter to me, but you'd be on one side and those two be like, if you don't know what you're talking about. Kind of thing.
I was going to say, throw the question up and get out of the way.
All right. Well, and then, look, after that, they're huge and they're Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, forever. They could put out an album or not put out an album. They could tour or not tour. People are going to sell out. People are going to love it. I hadn't realized one note that Stevie Young had to replace Malcolm after he passed away. I didn't realize that he had replaced him for a little bit when he was in rehab in the late 80s. And, that's cool to know that they wanted to keep it in the family back then. And he even wore his hair kind of long, so maybe nobody would notice kind of thing. But it did give Mal a chance to put himself back together. And then the result was the Razor's Edge, which allowed the band to, in my opinion, to keep going until this day.
Yeah, but they really started spreading out the albums. And then the albums got a little, that whole period in there. And basically those two albums, because I think I've just always liked Black Ice. I always thought Black Ice was really good. I hate Rock or Bust, but that Ballbreaker and Stiff Upper Lip, I always liken them to what Foghat did and what Status Quo did, and where they both like moved from their 70s sound and decided to make a poppy version of boogie rock, of old rootsy rock, right? So Foghat, you get into those 80s albums, and it's like a kind of like a flippant new wave version of being a boogie band, right? And then Status Quo just kind of cleans up the guitars a little and makes everything a little more quaint and a little more humorous, and that's what I feel you get on those two AC/DC albums. You start getting this, and it bothers me about Power Up too. I liked it when it first came out, and I was excited, and the enthusiasm's waned a little because I'm just feeling like there's something missing in the guitar tones. They've just cleaned them up a little too much that it doesn't sound heavy, even though they're writing heavy songs. Right. And even the ones, even Stiff Upper Lip and Ballbreaker are like this as well. The songs are written exactly as heavy as all the other AC/DC songs, but they're just really tame in the production.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's something to be said there. And I think we need to have you back on to talk Status Quo sometime, because, being that I was in the UK, we do a lot of dichotomies. Like, some people make it in the US, but not in the UK, and vice versa. Even if they're from that country, they might do better in the other one. And Status Quo is one that they're a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame kind of band in the UK. In America, I can't get anybody to give me, what's your favorite Status Quo song? I've never even heard of that band. I'm like, they're a huge band. They are huge.
My favorite 60 seconds of all of rock and roll is by Status Quo.
And what's that?
It's when in Backwater. Yeah, that's what it's called. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The first song on Quo Quo, the 76 album, right?
Okay.
That one, right? Yeah, it's called Backwater. Yeah, it's Backwater, Just Take Me. That's right.
I gotta take your word for it, man.
So what happens is I play this. God, it seems like I play it once a week, walking around with my earbuds on or whatever, because it just puts a smile on my face. So what happens in that is there's this guitar solo section, and it's kind of like, it's almost Benny Hill-ish, right? It's like a little silly and melodic, and it's going along. It's not very technical or whatever. So there's this long guitar solo, and it's building and building and building and building. And he comes out of it and resolves, and they go back into another verse. And it's one of those actual moments where you really feel like they sped up the song a tiny bit, and it's heavy as hell, right? I just love it to death. And then I could easily put in my top 10. They do the same thing on the next song, Just Take Me, where they have this long solo section again, and they pop out of it into a verse again, and it's amazing. And then I also basically say Little Lady is the most powerful boogie song ever made. It's just so heavy for a boogie. And down as well. But those three moments, Little Lady, basically when Little Lady kicks in, but it's powerful throughout. In fact, on Little Lady, I think they do the same thing where the most magic moment of that song is when they come out of a solo. I don't think they're going into a verse there. But yeah, just check out the tail end of that solo section on Backwater, the tail end on the solo section to Just Take Me, and just Little Lady exploding from the beginning. And it's just incredible. I just love those guys to death. Interviewed them, met them, all that stuff, the rare times they've ever been to Toronto. So
that's awesome. That's great. Well, Mark, we can't thank you enough for coming on the show, and the book is beautiful. Why don't you tell people where they can find it and find all your other great books?
Yeah, so martinpopoff.com. I've had the .com forever. I mean, more than half my income in any given year is me being a mail order guy, my own books. So there's PayPal buttons there for Canada, US, international. I sign them, send them out from the office. So anything of my books that are in print, any of the books that are in print, which is probably 80 titles or whatever, I've got, and I ship them out of the office here. So yeah, martinpopoff.com.
Excellent. Well, all the best success with the book. And I know you're working on some more. I have a feeling when that Kiss book comes out, we're going to be listening to you on the Shout It Out Loud cast with Tom and Zeus. At least it's in your best interest to do so, bud. They're the number one Kiss podcast on the planet. Thank you kindly, Martin. We appreciate it very much. We appreciate all the work you've done to keep rock alive and get the stories to the rockheads like us who can't get enough of it.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys. Very cool.
Thank you.
Good guy, that Martin Popoff. Heck of a writer.
Yeah. And like you said, this book, it's a great read, but you don't even have to read it. You can enjoy it just for the pictures.
Exactly.
And the pictures of the band, the pictures of the buttons, the memorabilia, the album covers, the ticket stubs, it just gives a real great history of the band throughout the years.
Yeah, it's not like a biography where there's like 150 pages and then there's 8 pages of photos and then there's another 150 pages.
Right.
There's photos throughout, whether it's the band or the album covers or the stickers or all that kind of fun stuff. And it allows you to kind of skip because it's about 50 moments. And yes, some of it's about that album or that tour or that point in time, but you can just go and pick out like, well, I don't know much about Fly on the Wall. Why don't I just go read that bit? And it's 2 or 3 pages. It's easy to do. And plus you'll see some clips or photos of the guys from that time. So really cool book, great addition to anybody's rock collection.
Yeah. So my point on that was going to be that was one of the things that I really found interesting was that in between time between For Those About to Rock and Who Made Who, kind of when they came back, that in between where it was a little shaky to as far as commercially being viable. So definitely gonna go back and check out Flick the Switch.
That was our show with the legendary rock writer Martin Popoff of Canada. Definitely check out his website, martinpopoff.com, and order yourself one or several of his great tomes. I mean, this AC/DC coffee table book is amazing. But like he said, he's got more than 80 in print. Go find one on the band that you love and check it out. He's a great writer. He makes it fun. And this book in particular is great because of all the different stories from all over the years. And like I said, throughout the broadcast there, great pictures, great stuff that you won't find anywhere. I mean, if you're a big AC/DC fan, you ought to have this. But even if you're a casual one, this is a great book for you. It's engaging. It's got all the fun pictures in it, and I think you'll really like it. I can't wait to get my hard copy here very soon. And make sure you also check out his great podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff, a part of the Pantheon Podcast Network, of which we are proudly a part, and we're proud to be a part of any network that includes Martin Popoff and so many of the other great broadcasts on there. AC/DC are legends. They always will be. They never compromised. They always stuck to their guns, and they fired their guns. They may be a little long in the tooth now. I don't know how many more opportunities we're going to have, any of us, to see AC/DC ever again. But if they come to your town, you really don't want to miss it. I've seen them about 4 times. So glad that I did. So we want to know, folks, in this show, did we get something right? Did we get something wrong? Did we miss the point? Did we leave out your favorite part? Did we miss an opportunity to ask a poignant question of Martin? You have to tell us. You have to email us. It's uglyamericanwerewolf@gmail.com. You can let us know the concerts, the bands, the albums, the books, the rock properties that you want us to review. And please follow us at ugly_werewolf or at actionjack72. You can tweet us, you can DM us. We're also on Instagram. I believe that we're on Facebook somehow. We're certainly on YouTube. And if you're thinking about it, folks, don't just download and subscribe, but give us a positive review. If you're out there on Apple or Spotify or Good Pods or anywhere you get your podcasts, please give us a positive review. Those 5-star reviews go a long way to helping us find more rock and roll fans like you. It helps us get more great guests like Martin and the artists that created the music. So thanks as always to Pantheon Podcast. And thanks as always to our sponsor, RareVinyl.com. Whether you're looking for something from AC/DC or anybody else, use the code UGLY. Go to RareVinyl.com and you can save 10% off your orders. Now, next week, we have more hard rock and heavy metal for you. Not going to reveal it, but let's just say there's a big album that's turning 40, and we've got a very special guest who's going to tell us some great stories about his relationship with this band that I think we all know and love. So until next time, to all you rock and rollers all around the world, be cool and stay safe.